So what I'm going to talk about is, we've described it here as a retail response to invasive plants, and I'll just go through a bit of the background in terms of what we did at GardenWorks to develop a response to questions that we started getting from our customers in our stores a number of years ago. And we had this question that we asked ourselves: what should our response be to our customers, our staff, our industry, and our community? And the issue first came up, not surprisingly, from customers that started visiting our stores, particularly on the North Shore, who had seen and heard talk about the ivy pulls that were happening in Lighthouse Park in West Vancouver. And I'd heard about them a little bit because my wife walks our dog with a number of other ladies and dogs in West Vancouver's Lighthouse Park most weekdays. And she came home with stories about these gangs of people going through the park, pulling ivy and stuffing in plastic bags. And that was really the first that we heard about what was happening with invasive plants. We got our people involved, and we tried to get a greater awareness of the extent of problem ourselves. And as I say, we had this public questioning, public awareness going on, and our staff and management decided that we had to take a leadership position and move to the forefront. We knew there'd be some risks involved because some of the plants that we were starting to hear about that were problems were plants that generated a fair amount of sales for us, and we had to figure out how do we do that in terms of replacing those sales. But we felt that it was the right thing to do because it was consistent with some of the other things that we had done. For example, in 2007, we stopped the sale of weed and feed in our stores because our belief was that there were better solutions and it wasn't the right product to be selling. And basically, we established our policy and communicated to all of our staff and said that as of that time, we were going to stop buying those top 10 plants, and we were going to sell off our inventory during that summer. And as we sold it off, we made sure that people understood that these were plants that really, if you were planting them, they had to be very, very aware of planting them in confined situations and understand the risks that were involved if they got out of the environment they were in. I think a lot of you may be familiar with this brochure that was put together. I gather it's being updated and reformatted with an even bigger list of alternative plants for next year. But I think from our perspective, we sort of view ourselves as being on the front line. We're the people that deal with the gardening public on a more frequent basis, and that we'd like to be able to make sure that customers have got the education, that understand there are certain plants that when they're put in the garden that they can cause and create lots of problems, and that there are lots of other alternatives that can be planted to help stop those problems and let people have gardens that look just as great without the plants that might cause problems. I know that within the BCLNA there's continued discussion going on between the retailers and the growers to try to make sure that the growers minimize the number of plants that they're selling that are invasive, try to come up with better alternatives, and also work with the garden centers to make sure that more garden centers take the same kind of stand. And I'm quite optimistic because there's been quite a move afoot the last year to deal with the whole issue of cosmetic pesticides, and the Nursery Trades Association has taken a very active stand to come up with a public position against the sale of cosmetic pesticides, and it's been one that's created lots of discussion and some controversy within the industry, but I think more and more people are recognizing that in the long term it's much better dealt with on a united front, and I think the same kind of thing is happening with a more common approach for invasive plants. There's not really a lot of new plants coming in from Asia. I think there was a real push going back, I'd say 15 years ago, driven by a couple of growers who were very, very interested and very involved. There was actually some missions that went to China looking for plants. I think that's really died off quite a bit, and most of the new things we're seeing now are hybrid varieties. And the biggest challenge there is again the whole issue of someone comes up with a new variety of buddleia that is allegedly sterile, yet you go on the internet and you do some research and you discover that maybe it's not sterile. Maybe it's sterile if it's grown in New Mexico, but grown in British Columbia it might be sterile. So that's one of the ongoing challenges. So in terms of new plants coming into Canada from other parts of the world, I say that's not as much of an issue. It's more the hybrids that we're trying to get a better understanding of. It's a slow process, but we found suppliers willing to grow other plants that are good alternatives, simply because they know that we're not going to buy the other one, so you better find something that we will buy, because otherwise we're not going to buy those plants from you. So.
In the other garden centers that I've counted a little bit, the first thing they say is, well, there's just no suppliers. So.
Well, they just have to look harder. I think they're out there. In the very back?
Advice on one thing that people should do to get more retailers doing similar actions to yours, what would that be? What could this room do to get similar responses?
I think just engage the owners of the business and make them realize that a lot of these plants can cause serious problems. I think that, the people that I know that own the independent garden centers they're all good people. They want to do things well and do things properly. And I think engaging those people, because as I said, we really heard about it by customers coming in saying, why are you selling English ivy? Haven't you been down to Lighthouse Park and see what it's doing to the old growth forest? And suddenly staff started saying, yeah, I was there and it's a problem. So that's what I'd suggest. Funny story. So I went to a conference called Weeds Across the Border in Washington, D.C. last year to give a similar discussion or a similar presentation and be involved in a big panel discussion. And I thought I'd have some fun going across the border. So I was going through Homeland Security in Toronto. The fellow said, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to Washington, D.C. to speak in a seminar. And he said, what's a seminar about? And I said, oh, it's called Invasive Alien Species. So I was pretty sure he put his hand on his gun and so looked at me very, very carefully. So anyway, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.